when we read claims in the news about, it's now the golden age of conspiracy theories, or conspiracy theories have gone mainstream in the way they never have before, we have to be cautious of those because often they're made without data. And certainly there wasn't data, certainly not quantitative data prior to around 2010 for a lot of the things we're talking about now. Even if we try to measure things with internet data, even that's a very short time span, and we have to, be careful in terms of thinking, is our data speaking to some particular circumstance right now, or is it something we can generalize from? And speaking of internet data, trying to do content analysis on conspiracy theories is incredibly difficult. There's a lot of, I'm in touch with a lot of researchers right now who are either doing it by hand with human coders or are trying to use AI or machine learning to do this. It's really hard to do, and part of the reason is that everyone disagrees over what counts. And some of this is political disagreement, right? People disagree about what's true and what isn't. And a lot of those disagreements stem from our personal politics, right? So you got a bunch of coders in a room, they're all going to come to different determinations of what's a conspiracy theory and what's not because they all disagree about what's true and what's not. And this makes content analysis studies really hard. I'm not saying that it can't be done, it's just incredibly difficult. If we're doing survey items, one thing we should be concerned about, and this is with all survey work, is that there's a lot of conspiracy theory items that have a lot of barrels to them. So, for example, I saw an item recently that was trying to measure QAnon, where it was, do you believe in a conspiracy theory about the deep state involving Satanists and child sex trafficking and Joe Biden? And there we have a really long survey item. And if people are saying yes, it could be they believe part of it, but maybe not all of it. Maybe they're just responding to the deep state prompt or the Joe Biden prompt, but not the QAnon part of it. So we want to think very carefully about how we're measuring what we're measuring, because there are sometimes there's items being deployed that get really high agreement with them, but then we wonder, is it because they've got so many stimuli inside the item itself? Same thing with our response options to our survey items. I've seen some questions where they have very unbalanced sets of response items. So, do you think the following conspiracy theory is true? And then it might be no, and then it might be a little bit true, a moderate amount true, very true, super likely true, totally true. And in that sort of case, you wind up with a lot of people agreeing, but that's because you've got all these categories of kind of sort of agreeing and not as many categories of not agreeing. So there's a literature has popped up around this and saying we need to have balanced sets of response options. Interpreting our survey data, I'm certainly guilty of this. I get a lot of calls from journalists saying, how many people believe in conspiracy theory X? And I'll say, well, on the latest survey, it's 25% or something. What I really should be saying is, 25% on my most recent survey agree or disagree, or agree or strongly agree with this item, right? And because what we tend to find is that as the survey items change and the response options change from survey to survey, you get different amounts of people buying in and agreeing with different things. So we have to be careful, because believing something on one survey item doesn't necessarily believe it when it's asked a different way. And again, this applies to all survey research, but it's particularly important. And this leads me to my final point. There have been a couple papers lately. One was published in Science where they use an AI chatbot to try and talk people out of their conspiracy theories. I just published one in Harvard Misinformation Review where we use a chatbot to have people reflect on their conspiracy theories. We find that some people give up their conspiracy theory belief after talking with the chatbot, which is a neat finding, right? And it sort of goes against the popular view of conspiracy theorists as never wanting to give up their beliefs. We find a lot of people will give up their beliefs if you make them think about it or try and change their mind with evidence. But what I would say is this, is that oftentimes our surveys are picking up on people who are what we might colloquially call true believers, people who are going to act on an idea, people for whom the idea is a reflection of their underlying worldviews and identities. And there's other people who just see an idea and say, "Oh, that sounds about right to me," or "I heard that recently, so yeah, I'll agree with it." But you can talk them out of it. And those are sort of two groups of people. So you can change the minds of people who don't hold an idea very strongly and don't care very much about it and probably wouldn't act on it. But that's all fine and good, but the people who you really need to reach are the ones who probably aren't going to change their minds, and that's the conundrum that we're left with.